Welcome back to Hannity. Today, the White House broke a long-held and very public promise of no boots on the ground in Syria when its spokesman announced that a small number of special operators will be sent into that country to help the battle against ISIS. Well, in light of this policy shift, how will all this affect the 2016 campaign for president? Well, here are some varying ways the Republican presidential candidate said they would have handled ISIS. Watch.
Create a safe zone within Syria. The Turks have said they would cooperate, an area that's protected both on the ground and from the air. And from that spot is where these rebel groups that will take on ISIS and Assad can help organize themselves.
I think we can work with our allies to get after ISIS and train them, give them better weapons, make sure, and I'm not talking about now rebels now, I'm talking about our allies in Jordan, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, and use American military hardware and American military trainers, American military air power.
We need to reestablish forward-leaning military presence to be able to take out ISIS. And as it relates to Syria, this has been made extraordinarily more complicated by inaction.
So boots on the ground in Iraq,
I would
take
knock
over the oil
the hell
fields.
out of ISIS. And frankly, if Russia wants to do it also, I'm okay with it.
Well, $20, you can figure out what any of that means. Joining us now, Fox News strategic analyst, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. Thanks a lot, Colonel, for joining us tonight. What exactly is the U.S. foreign policy goal in Syria? Who do we want to run Syria when the smoke clears?
We have no idea. And the policy goal of this administration, and the word is policy, not strategic. The policy goal is for Obama to get through till he passes the baton to the next president. He's just trying to survive. And what we heard today, with much ballyhoo, about up to 50 special operators, special forces personnel going to Syria to help guide strikes, coordinate operations, that is not a grand strategic turnaround. It is a meager act of desperation. It's an attempt to rescue this catastrophically failing policy that's so disastrous at this point that even when we succeed against Islamic State, it only helps Iran and Russia and the Assad regime. And basically, Vladimir Putin and the Iranians have created a de facto division of labor on the ground where we go after Islamic State for them and they go after the more moderate opposition and wipe it out and create refugees.
But why shouldn't we be supporting or rooting for the Assad regime, too? Yes, it's evil, but relatively speaking, it's not the most evil group in Syria by a long shot, maybe one of the least, and it's also, again, relatively speaking, a rational actor. You can kind of predict what the Assad people will do because they don't want to die, in contrast to ISIS. So why is it unthinkable that we would, in the end, be rooting for them to reestablish control over that country and stop the hemorrhaging of refugees into Europe, for example?
Well, several reasons. One, the Assad regime, with its barrel bombs and blanket attacks now supported by Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia, have killed far more Muslims and others than Islamic State has. I'm not giving you a brief for Islamic State. They're monsters. But in terms of sheer numbers, the dead, the blood is on Assad's hands. Another reason is at this point, the Russians, the Iranians, and the Assad regime are purposely they're engaging in religious cleansing. They're driving all the Sunni Muslims out of western and northwestern Syria. Those are the refugees pouring into Europe now. Relatively fewer from fleeing Islamic State. They're fleeing Assad, and Assad is perfectly happy to have them driven out of his country. And he'd rather have fewer people in control of the territory. Meanwhile, Putin's happy to disrupt the EU.
But I mean, Syria is a large multi-ethnic country. It was 10%.
Not anymore.
Well, it was. It was 10% Christian, minority Shiite, majority Sunni before the civil war, and it was presided over by Bashar al-Assad, and before that his father, Hafez al-Assad. So they have a track record of keeping a very complex, internally divided country in one piece. Isn't that kind of our goal, to see these countries run by someone who can keep them from becoming black holes?
Well, I just think it's too late. I mean, every argument you're making, Tucker, is technically correct. The Assad regime protected minority Christians, Alawites, Druze. But the time to make that pick really was 4 years ago.
Right.
Now it's gotten so gruesome that, first of all, I don't think Syria is ever going to be completely put back together. Those borders with which our State Department remains infatuated, artificial borders drawn 100 years ago, they're gone. We speak of Iraq and Syria because we don't have new names for them yet.
Right.
Kurdistan is emerging. But what I'm afraid of is two things. One, we belatedly back the guys who mean ill to us. And secondly, that we waste American blood and treasure trying to restore the Rand McNally view of the world, when the fact is, as you know, borders have always changed. They're
Right.
changing now, and the bottom line is there is no good choice left in Syria for us now. I think my own preference is to cut back on what we're doing and let the Russians and the Iranians have it for a while and see how they like it.
Well, that doesn't seem like such a bad idea. Wouldn't it help, though, if the United States had a clear picture of who we want to run it? Because then at least, you could root for that person rather than just sort of pretending we're going to undermine this guy with the hope these guys will turn out to be moderate when there's no evidence they are. I mean, shouldn't we start there with the goal?
Of course we should, but that's not the way the Obama administration works. It's all politics. It is not about defeating our enemies. It's not about advancing American interests.
Right.
It's about political protection of the president. I think there can be no question about that. But also, again, you can't take this place that used to be called Syria out of context. Remember, next door is what used to be Iraq, which is now an Iranian vassal state. We're done.
Yes.
We don't control anything in Iraq beyond our multi-billion-dollar embassy in Baghdad. They're in Yemen. Iran. We have now, as of this week, we've given Iran an equal place at the supposed peace talks in Vienna. I mean, what more can our president do for Iran?
No, you're right. It's so depressing to hear someone put it so succinctly. Meanwhile, Europe's being completely destroyed. It's all very sad. Thanks a lot, Colonel, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Tony.
Not exactly upbeat, but it's important to hear that. Thanks.